Marcus Webb had a habit of arriving before everyone else. Not because anyone asked him to, not because it was in any contract or job description or performance review. He arrived first because the site was different in the early morning. The concrete was quiet. The steel was cold and honest. And if you knew how to listen, really listen, a building would tell you everything it needed before the workers arrived, and the noise made it impossible to hear anything at all. He had been doing this for 28 years. He would park his truck at the edge of the lot, pour coffee from a thermos his daughter had given him 3 birthdays ago, and walk the perimeter. Not with a clipboard, not with a phone, just his eyes and his hands and the accumulated weight of 28 years of knowing what a structure was supposed to feel like when everything was right. He knew when a pour had cured wrong. He knew when a weld had been rushed. He knew by the sound of the wind moving through an unfinished frame whether the load-bearing calculations had been honored or approximated. He had never been wrong. That was, in the end, the thing that cost him everything. Marcus grew up in a house his grandfather built by hand on 4 acres of red Georgia clay at the edge of a county that had never made room for men like them. His grandfather, Earl Webb, had purchased that land in 1951, with 11 years of wages from a paper mill that paid black workers 60 cents for every dollar it paid white ones. Earl had not complained about the 60 cents. He had saved every fraction of it. He had purchased the land legally, recorded the deed at the county courthouse on a Tuesday morning in September, and driven home with the carbon copy folded in the breast pocket of his good shirt. He told Marcus's father, "This land will outlast all of them. You make sure it outlasts you too." Marcus's father tried. He died at 67 with the land still in the family's name, or so he believed. The adverse possession claim had been filed quietly in 1987 by the Aldrin family, whose farm bordered the Webb property on the eastern edge. The claim argued continuous use for over 40 years. It argued the land had been abandoned. It argued that no living Webb had maintained the property or paid taxes on it since 1979. All 3 arguments were false. Marcus did not discover this until the week after his father's funeral, when he drove down to Georgia to sort through the old house and found a folder in the back of his father's closet. Inside it, the original deed, tax receipts going back to 1963, a letter from a county assessor dated 1988, acknowledging receipt of a formal objection to the adverse possession claim, and a second letter, dated 3 months later, from an attorney named Gerald Aldrin, informing Earl Webb that the objection had been dismissed on procedural grounds. Marcus sat on the edge of his father's bed with those papers in his hands for a long time. The land was worth $4 million now. A developer had already begun preliminary conversations with the Aldrin family about a mixed-use project on the eastern acreage, the same acreage his grandfather had bought for 11 years of 60-cent wages. He put the folder in his truck. He drove back to the city. He went to work the next morning because the Aldrin Tower project was in its critical structural phase, and he was the only person on site who understood the load-bearing sequence well enough to supervise it. He did not say anything to anyone about the folder. He had learned a long time ago that a black man with a grievance and no leverage was not a man making a claim. He was a man making a target of himself. He would wait. He would work. And when the moment came, if the moment came, he would be ready. That was how Earl Webb had done it. That was how Marcus Webb did everything. Before we continue, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Drop your city and country in the comments below. I always enjoy seeing how far these stories travel and the amazing people who gather here from around the world. And if you enjoy powerful stories filled with emotion, unexpected twists, and unforgettable moments, consider subscribing to the channel and like. There are many more stories waiting for you here. Now, let's get back to the story. The Aldrin Tower was 42 floors of glass and reclaimed steel, rising in the middle of a neighborhood that 10 years ago had been home to 3 Baptist churches, a hardware store, a laundromat, and a restaurant called Eleanor's. Eleanor's was gone now, or rather, Eleanor's had become something else, something owned by someone else. But Marcus still thought about it the way a man thinks about a thing he built with his own hands and then watched someone else put their name on. He and a man named Dennis Pratt had opened Eleanor's in 2009. Dennis had the money. Marcus had everything else. The recipes his grandmother had taught him in the kitchen of the Georgia farmhouse. The eye for a space. The understanding of what made a room feel like somewhere a person wanted to stay. He had spent 4 months renovating the interior himself, nights and weekends, after full days on construction sites. He had chosen every fixture, mixed every paint color, designed the layout of the kitchen for maximum efficiency with minimum staff. Dennis had written the checks and shown up for the opening in a new suit. When Southern Living put Eleanor's on their national list in 2014, Dennis gave an interview. He talked about his vision. He talked about his investment in the community. He talked about the name, Eleanor's, and said it had been inspired by the neighborhood's history. He did not mention that Eleanor was Marcus's grandmother. He did not mention Marcus at all. Marcus had read the interview on his phone, sitting in his truck outside a job site. He had read it twice. Then he had put the phone in his glove compartment and gone back to work, because there were 12 men waiting on him to clear the next phase of a foundation pour. By 2019, Dennis had sold Eleanor's to a hospitality group for $2.3 million. Marcus had owned 30% of the restaurant by their original agreement. Dennis had paid him out at a valuation that reflected a bad year, 2017, the year the kitchen caught fire and they had closed for 4 months, rather than the sale price. Marcus had accepted the check. He had not signed anything releasing further claims. He had put that check in the same drawer as the folder from his father's closet. He was building a case the way his grandfather had built that farmhouse, one careful piece at a time, with materials that would last. The new project manager arrived on the Aldrin Tower site in March. His name was Todd Riley. He was 34 years old. He had a master's degree from Georgia Tech, a firm handshake, and the particular confidence of a man who had been told his whole life that confidence was the same thing as competence. He was not a bad engineer. He was simply an engineer who had never built anything he didn't have a manual for. He introduced himself to Marcus on a Tuesday morning, read through the site reports for 45 minutes, and by that afternoon had begun CCing himself on every communication Marcus sent to the structural consultants. By the end of the week, he had restructured the reporting chain so that Marcus's recommendations went through Todd before they went anywhere else. He was friendly about it. That was the thing. He smiled when he explained it. He used words like streamline and alignment and unified voice. He clapped Marcus on the shoulder once and said, "You've laid incredible groundwork here. I just want to make sure we're presenting it cohesively." Marcus had nodded once and gone back to the site. He understood what was happening. He had seen it before. A man arrives. He reads the room. He identifies who actually knows what they're doing. And then he positions himself between that person and everyone above them, so that the knowledge flows up through him, and the credit accumulates on his side of the filter. It was a very old system. It did not require malice. It only required the assumption, quiet, unexamined, rarely spoken aloud, that the man in the hard hat was a resource, not a mind. That the system he had built was infrastructure, not authorship. Marcus did not fight it. He documented everything. Every recommendation he made, he followed with a written summary sent to his own email. Every conversation he had with the structural consultants, he logged. The load-bearing calculations he had developed over 14 months, the specific modifications he had made to account for the soil composition on this particular block, which was unlike anything the standard specifications assumed, he kept in a folder on a personal drive, with date stamps going back to the first week of the project. He was not building a lawsuit. He was not planning an accusation. He was simply a man who had learned, from a folder in his father's closet, that the people who hold the paperwork hold the story. And Marcus Webb intended to hold his own story this time. The flag came in April. Marcus had been walking the 15th floor on a Tuesday morning when he noticed it. A section of the curtain wall connection, the point where the glass exterior met the steel frame, had been installed using a fastening sequence that did not match his specifications. It was not obviously wrong. It would not have been caught by anyone who was not looking for it. But Marcus had designed the fastening sequence himself, and he knew what it was supposed to look like, and this was not it. He wrote it up the same morning. He flagged it in the system. He sent the report to Todd. Todd sent it to the developer's structural engineer, a man named Patterson, who had been on the project for 6 months and had never once walked the floor before 10 in the morning. Patterson reviewed the report and sent back a 3-paragraph response, explaining that the installation was within acceptable tolerance, that Marcus's specifications were conservative beyond what code required, and that proceeding with the correction would delay the curtain wall installation by 3 weeks at a cost the project could not absorb. Todd forwarded the response to Marcus with a single line. Per Patterson, we're good to proceed. Let's keep the schedule. Marcus sat with that email for a long time. He wrote back, I want my original flag on record. I am not withdrawing the concern. Todd replied, noted. It's in the system. 2 weeks later, Marcus was called into a meeting with the developer's senior project director, a man named Charles Aldrin. It was the first time Marcus had heard that name in a professional context. He sat across the conference table from a man in his late 60s, with the broad hands of someone who had once worked outdoors, and the suit of someone who had not, in a very long time. Charles Aldrin did not look at Marcus the way a man looks at someone he recognizes. Marcus looked at Charles Aldrin the way a man looks at a name he has read in a letter dated 1988. He said nothing. He listened. The meeting was brief. The developer was concerned about the pace of the flagging process. There had been 4 flags in the past 6 weeks, all from Marcus, all reviewed and cleared by Patterson. The pattern was creating friction with the subcontractors, who felt their work was being questioned without cause. The developer wanted to ensure the site had the right leadership structure going forward. Todd Riley would be taking primary authority over site sign-offs. Marcus would continue in a supervisory capacity focused on day-to-day operations. Marcus nodded once. He went back to the site. He logged the meeting in his personal records. He walked the 15th floor one more time before the end of the day, running his hand along the curtain wall connection, feeling what the steel felt like in the late afternoon, when the wind was up and the building was moving the way all tall buildings move. It moved a little more than it should have. He wrote it down. He sent it to his own email. He went home. His daughter Amara was 17, and she had her great-grandmother's name in the middle of hers and her great-grandmother's habit of asking questions that arrived like stones dropped in still water. She was at the kitchen table doing calculus when Marcus came in. She looked up. She looked at his face. Rough day? He hung his jacket on the hook by the door. The same hook his mother had installed in every house she had ever lived in, because, she said, a man who doesn't know where to hang his jacket doesn't know where he belongs. Days are just days, he said. She watched him pour a glass of water and stand at the kitchen counter and look at nothing in particular for a moment. Dad. Her voice was careful the way it got when she had been thinking about something for a while. You remember when you told me about Great-Grandpa Earl and the land? I remember. You said he recorded the deed. You said he kept every receipt. He did. Then how did they take it? Marcus set the glass down. He looked at his daughter, the serious set of her eyes, the pencil still in her hand, the calculus problem half finished on the page. They counted on him not having the money to fight it, he said. And they counted on him being old enough that he might not live long enough to see it through. Amara was quiet for a moment. But you have the papers. I have the papers. And you have money now. He almost smiled. Some. She nodded slowly. the way she nodded when she was filing something away. Then they miscounted, she said, and looked back down at her calculus. Marcus stood at the counter a little longer than necessary. Then he went to his study and opened the drawer, and took out the folder. He had the deed. He had the tax receipts. He had the letter from Gerald Aldrin. He had the restaurant agreement with Dennis Pratt. He had 14 months of date-stamped site documentation. He called an attorney he trusted. He left a message. He went to bed and slept better than he had in weeks. The storm came in October. It had been building for 3 days. The kind of slow-moving weather system that the forecasters track carefully and the developers ignore because weather delays cost money. By the time the warnings went from advisory to mandatory, the Aldrin Tower was 40 floors complete, and the curtain wall installation was finished on all but the top 2 levels. The evacuation order for the construction site came through at 6 a.m. on a Thursday. By 9 a.m., the wind was sustained at 62 miles per hour. At 11:17 a.m., a section of the curtain wall on the 15th floor failed. The glass did not shatter outward. It separated from the frame at the fastening point, the exact fastening point Marcus had flagged in April, and swung inward on the remaining connection before the wind caught it and tore it free entirely. The floor was empty. The building had been evacuated. The only injury was a worker named Ray Cousins, who had gone back for his toolbox and caught a fragment on his forearm on the way out. 6 stitches. He was home by evening. Marcus heard about it from 3 different contractors before noon. His phone rang 11 times in 2 hours. He did not answer most of them. He sat in his truck in the parking lot of a hardware store and drank the last of the coffee from his thermos and looked at nothing in particular. He was not glad the wall had failed. He had not wanted to be right. A man who builds things does not want them to fall. He had flagged that connection because he did not want anyone to get hurt, and no one had gotten hurt, and that was the only part of this that felt like anything close to relief. Everything else was just paperwork. And Marcus Webb had the paperwork. Claire Aldrin arrived on site at 2 p.m., in a dark coat and low heels that were wrong for the mud, but right for a boardroom, which told Marcus everything he needed to know about who had sent her and what she had been told to do. She was 31. She was sharp in the way that people are sharp when they have been trained to solve problems before anyone outside the room finds out the problems exist. She was Charles Aldrin's granddaughter, though she carried the name like a credential rather than a history. She did not know yet that it was also a document, that it appeared in a letter, that a man named Earl Webb had read that letter and folded it carefully and put it in a folder that his grandson now kept in a drawer next to 14 months of date-stamped site records and a restaurant agreement with an unsigned release. She found Marcus at the edge of the site. Someone had pointed her in his direction without explaining why, the way people on a job site always pointed toward Marcus without quite being able to articulate what made them do it. Mr. Webb. Her voice was professional, measured. I'm Claire Aldrin. I'm handling the legal response to today's incident. I understand you filed a flag on this connection in April. I did, and that flag was reviewed and cleared by the project engineer. It was. She looked at him carefully. She had the look of someone assembling a picture from pieces that were not yet adding up. I'd like to understand your concern at the time. Walk me through what you saw. He walked her through it. He was precise. He used no more words than the thing required. He described the fastening sequence, the deviation from his specifications, the movement he had felt in the wall on the afternoon he had gone back to check it. He did not editorialize. He did not say, "I told you so," in any form, because it was not a phrase that had ever served a careful man. She took notes. She asked good questions. He answered them. When he was finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Your specifications," she said, "those originated with you?" From the first week of the project. 14 months of documentation, all date-stamped. Something moved across her face. Not quite recognition. The beginning of a realization that the picture she had been given before she arrived was missing significant portions of the territory. "Mr. Webb," she said, "I'd like to schedule a formal interview. Tomorrow, if possible." "I'll be available," he said. "I'd like my attorney present." She paused. "Of course." She looked at him once more, the way a person looks when they are revising an assumption in real time. "Is there anything else I should know before tomorrow?" Marcus looked out at the site. The gap in the curtain wall was visible from where they stood. A clean rectangular absence in the glass facade, the steel frame exposed, and honest in the gray afternoon light. "There is," he said, "but it's not about the wall." She waited. "Your grandfather's name is Gerald Aldrin." It was not a question. Her expression did not collapse. She was too well trained for that. But the quality of her stillness changed. The way stillness changes when a person is no longer simply listening, but recalculating. "Yes," she said carefully. "In 1988, a man named Earl Webb filed a formal objection to an adverse possession claim on 4 acres of land in Burke County, Georgia. Your grandfather was the attorney of record on that claim. The objection was dismissed on procedural grounds." Marcus reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and produced a folded piece of paper. He held it out. "That's a copy. The original is with my attorney." She took the paper. She looked at it. She read it the way a lawyer reads something, not for the words, but for what the words mean in a room with a judge present. When she looked up, there was something in her face that was not quite apology and not quite accusation, and was perhaps the particular expression of a person who has just understood that the ground beneath a case is not where they were told it was. "Mr. Webb," she said quietly, "how long have you had this?" "Since my father's funeral," he said. 4 years. "And you waited." "I was building a case," he said. "The way my grandfather built a house, one piece at a time, with materials that would last." The wind had dropped. The site was quiet, the way sites get quiet after something has gone wrong, and the immediate crisis has passed, and what remains is the long, serious work of understanding how it happened, and who knew what and when. There is a kind of patience that is not passivity. It is not resignation. It is not the patience of a man who has given up on being seen. It is the patience of a man who understands that the world moves on certain hinges, and that if you wait long enough, and document carefully enough, and do not let your anger make you careless, the hinge will present itself. Earl Webb had been that kind of patient. He had not lived to use it. Marcus Webb had inherited the patience and the papers both. The formal interview lasted 4 hours. Marcus's attorney was a woman named Dr. Patricia Cole, small, gray-haired, with reading glasses on a chain, and the particular stillness of someone who has heard every version of a story and knows which details matter. She had practiced property and contract law for 31 years. She had been waiting for a case like this one, she told Marcus afterward, since 1993. Claire Aldrin came with 2 colleagues. She was professional throughout. She asked precise questions. She listened without interrupting. By the end of the 2nd hour, the framing of the meeting had shifted. It had begun as a liability review for a construction incident. It had become something considerably more complex. A conversation that touched the Aldrin Tower project, the Eleanor's restaurant sale, the adverse possession claim in Burke County, and 14 months of documentation that established, without ambiguity, who had designed the systems that the Aldrin Tower had been built on. Claire stepped out twice to make calls. Each time she came back, the quality of her expression had changed slightly. The incremental recalibration of a person working through new information faster than they had expected to need to. At the end of the 4th hour, she sat across from Marcus and looked at him the way Vivian had looked at Darius in the server room. Directly, without performance, in the specific way of a person who has decided that honesty is more useful than management. "I want to be transparent with you," she said. "The picture I was given when I came to this site this morning was incomplete." "I know," Marcus said. The wall failure is a significant liability exposure. The documentation you've provided establishes that the concern was raised, logged, and overridden. That changes the exposure profile considerably. She paused. The other matters, the restaurant, the land, those are separate conversations. But I'm not in a position to pretend they're not on the table. They're on the table, Marcus said. What do you want? She asked. It was a direct question, the kind that only gets asked when the power in a room has quietly redistributed itself. Marcus looked at the table for a moment. He thought about Earl Webb driving home from the county courthouse in 1951 with the carbon copy of a deed in the breast pocket of his good shirt. He thought about his father dying at 67, believing the land was still theirs. He thought about Amara at the kitchen table, with her pencil and her calculus, and her unbothered certainty that if you have the papers, you have the story. I want what was owed, he said. Not more, not a performance. What was owed, documented correctly, and settled in a way that my daughter can read about when she's older, and understand that her great-great-grandfather's patience was not wasted. Claire looked at him for a long moment. That, she said quietly, I think we can do. The settlement took 7 months. The land in Burke County was returned to the Webb family through a negotiated resolution that acknowledged the original deed and the procedural failures that had led to the dismissal of the 1987 objection. The Eleanor's valuation was corrected, and a supplementary payment was made that reflected Marcus's 30% stake at the actual sale price, rather than the 2017 loss year figure. The Aldrin Tower curtain wall was rebuilt to Marcus's original specifications. He was brought back to the project, not in a supervisory capacity, not as a consultant, as lead structural engineer of record. His name was on the revised plans. Todd Riley remained on the project. He was professional about it. He learned things. Patterson submitted revised calculations that matched what Marcus had specified 14 months earlier. He did not acknowledge the discrepancy directly. Some people never do. Charles Aldrin retired in February. It was announced as a planned transition. Marcus drove down to Burke County the week after the settlement closed. He parked at the edge of the property. 4 acres of red Georgia clay bordered by pine woods on the south side and a gravel road on the north. He got out of the truck and walked the perimeter the way he walked a job site early in the morning, without a clipboard, without his phone, just his eyes and his hands. The land had not been farmed in years. The Aldrin family had let the eastern acreage go to grass once the development conversations had started. The grass was long now. There were wildflowers in the low corner where the soil ran wet in spring. The old fence line that Earl Webb had built in 1953 was still standing on the western edge, the posts tilted but not fallen, the wire loose but unbroken. Marcus stood at the fence and put his hand on one of the posts. The wood was gray and weathered, but underneath the surface it was still solid. His grandfather had chosen the timber himself, had set the posts himself, had strung the wire by hand, because he understood that a fence built right would outlast the argument about who owned what lay beyond it. He had been correct. Marcus stood there a long time. The wind moved through the pines. The wildflowers tilted and recovered. The fence post was solid under his hand. He had not cried at his father's funeral. He had not cried when he read the interview in the truck outside the job site. He had not cried in the server room or the conference room or the 7 months of meetings that followed. He cried now, briefly, without apology, the way a man cries when he is finally somewhere private enough to do it honestly. Then he wiped his face and took out his phone and called Amara. "We got it back," he said when she answered. She didn't say anything for a moment. When she did, her voice was steady. Steady the way it got when she was filing something away permanently. "Great-Grandpa Earl would be glad," she said. "Yeah," Marcus said. He would. He stood at the fence until the sun went behind the pines. Then he got in the truck and drove back to the city. There was work in the morning. There was always work in the morning, and Marcus Webb had never once in his life failed to arrive before everyone else. There is a thing that gets called strength that is not really strength. It is endurance, performed for an audience that never asked for the performance. Real strength is quieter than that. It keeps records. It waits. It does not announce itself at the moment of injury because it is already thinking about the moment of remedy. Earl Webb recorded a deed in 1951 and put the carbon copy in his breast pocket and drove home. Marcus Webb put the copy in a drawer and went to work. Amara Webb looked up from her calculus and said, "Then they miscounted. 3 generations, 1 piece of paper. Patient the way only people who have been given no other option learn to be patient, not because they chose patience, but because they understood something early that some people never understand at all. The ones who hold the paperwork hold the story. And the story, if you are careful enough, will eventually speak for itself. If this story moved you even a little, please hit that like button right now. It costs you 1 second, and it helps this story reach someone who needs it today. Subscribe if you haven't already, because there are more stories coming. Stories about quiet strength and unexpected love, and the kind of people the world overlooks until it can't anymore. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, and I will see you in the next one.